Hi and welcome to episode 11 of Holistic Stroke Solutions podcast. In this episode we're going to talk about often missed brain imbalances and cognitive issues after stroke. Before I dive into that and give an overview of what we are going to cover, first of all, I sincerely missed you. We have been away on intensive training overseas and that took all the time, so we didn't produce new episodes. But here it is, we continue where we left off. What are we going to discuss in this episode? Well, first of all, we're going to give an overview of what we discussed so far and how brain imbalances and cognitive issues after stroke, where it fits in. Then I'm going to give an overview of how the brain in a whole, how the different brain areas work together, where the areas that we talked about, the limbs, the spinal cord, the brainstem, the cerebellum, how it ties in with overall function. And then we're going to specifically talk why are there cognitive issues more so after stroke than before, and why are cognitive issues enhanced after stroke. And I will use an example or two of our current clients so you understand this better. Then, more importantly, I'm also going to give an idea how this may be useful in your stroke rehabilitation and why it is vital that you tie this in with your stroke rehabilitation. And then at the end, I will also provide some information how you can find out if you can benefit from this. So, where did we leave off? In previous episodes 1 to 10, we basically talked about reconnection, disconnection, synchronization, how limbs become disconnected from the central nervous system, and what we can do with the arms, with the legs, with balance to address this, and how this ties up with what's happening in the higher brain centers where you got your stroke. That's very brief overview, but that is enough for now. So what we are going to do now, we're going to move inside. We're going to really examine what happens in and around the stroke area and why does this lead to hidden problems. I call them hidden because they're often not addressed. They are seen as, okay, this belongs to the territory, and you have to, with a bit of luck, it will improve once you get going. But there are some issues that really hinder progress, and over time we see with our clients, and you may have experienced this, and we see this in the stroke population as a whole, that cognition suffers after a stroke. And that brain imbalances really prevent you from recovering more than you could. In previous episodes, I already discussed the fact that the good brain areas, the good brain circuits, they basically take over. Many studies show that we reroute activity to the areas that are functioning, even to the hemisphere or cerebellum that is still intact and functioning, and that creates an imbalance. When we see this in children, we know this creates internal conflict for their development. In adults, it also creates internal conflict. So the more imbalance you have, the more internal conflict you experience. So remember this. So that is one of the reasons, a very important reason, to address these imbalances. And I know, of course, the areas that have been severely damaged that may not recover will never recover, but you have a lot of areas and circuits and brain function left after your stroke. And that can be rewired through neuroplasticity, but you have to do the right things. So, before we go on to the cognitive aspects, when we have brain imbalances, which almost all stroke survivors have, we have to do other things to increase function in the brain areas, the hemisphere or the cerebellum, or the circuits in the brain that have been left weaker, to rebalance what is going on in the brain. This is hugely important. You cannot just lean on the good side. To illustrate this, I will illustrate one of our clients who knew he was on the spectrum, so he had ADHD before he got a stroke, but he was functioning at a very high level, executive function. He was the head of a big firm. He got a stroke in his right hemisphere. This is also where attention, concentration, your relationship to the outside world comes from. And after his stroke, which was on top of the fact that there was already some imbalance in brain function because of the ADHD, he basically tried to talk himself out of anything he had to do. And he didn't even notice it. So one day I sat him down and I explained to him, listen, you have to start talking yourself out of this. Why do you do this? Well, first of all, his left brain was completely intact. We know in the majority of people that the left brain is where you produce verbal communication. So language is produced there. That's your logic, linear thinking brain. It's geared towards details, structure, and fine motoric function. So when you have a right brain stroke, usually the left brain becomes more dominant. So you start to see the world and approach the world in a little bit different way. When you start talking about it, you start to in detail explain what is going on with you and why you can't use your left leg and not stand on it or not move, and how it hurts, what you basically do is use your left brain even more, and the imbalance starts to become bigger to the extent that you actually inhibit the function of the right brain completely, which prevents movement on the left side completely. This is a very extreme example, but I bet with most of you there are some aspects of these imbalances, and I just want you to become aware that we know they are there, and sometimes it's very subtle, sometimes it's very obvious, sometimes some characteristics become enhanced after a stroke, but we have to address them, and we can address them because you can do a lot. Even if your motoric execution, your primary motor centers on the right brain are affected, you can do a lot with the areas in front and to the back. For example, in this client's case, he didn't feel his left side, and we can use this to get better communication from the sensation of his left body, his neglect on the left side. We can stimulate that in a variety of ways to enhance the communication from the centers in the back of his brain to the motor areas and to his executive areas. We can do things with very specific eye exercises to enhance function of his right frontal brain so it feeds back to the motor area. So we can do things in front, we can do things in the back. And even if you have some damage here, you can still do a lot of activities around what is not completely possible anymore to enhance function and decrease imbalances. This is a hugely important point, and I think that if you think about it, this is in most cases absolutely not addressed. It's like a gray area. It's like it's like outer space in rehabilitation, and you can quote me on this because I see this time after time after time, and it's like a left chance of more recovery. So remember this, there are imbalances, even if they can be subtle, and there is a big chance that you can still do things to rehabilitate function around the severely damaged areas to enhance overall activity in the opposite hemisphere or in the opposite cerebellum, or in very specific circuits that we're going to talk about in next episodes. Now, so there's brain imbalances. I want you to be aware of it, and at the end of this video I'm going to explain how you can find out what is going on. Then we have the cognitive issues, not per se psychological issues, but cognitive issues. Your cognition suffers after a stroke. Most stroke survivors will notice this very much in the first 3 to 4 months. That is because there is neuroinflammation. The brain's immune system tries to clear out the brain, and this takes tremendous energy. Many of you have experienced total chaos the first months after your stroke. You cannot even think normally, even if you were functioning at a very high level. You have brain fog, you can have headaches, you are fatigued all the time, and there's a reason for this. Your immune system, while it starts repairing the areas that have been affected the most by your stroke, whether that's a clot or a bleed, doesn't matter, it tries to repair and reorganize, and you have to keep quiet. So the brain and the immune system of the brain makes sure that you don't do too much. You give the immune system the chance to do this. At the same time, we know you have to start very specific activities to regain arm and hand function, and the earlier you can start, the better. But we still have to give the immune system the chance, or the neuroinflammation, which is natural, to clear out and reorganize, so after that you can continue and you can rebuild your brain. So that is stage number 1. And after that, we see that for some people, if they had a small stroke, things start to go uphill and only uphill up there, and they recover function. But for the majority, they will notice that after the stroke, things are never completely the same again. Now, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, you probably lost some of the function permanently or semi-permanently. Even if there's a lot of things you can still do to build it up over time. Not just within the first year, but also after it. Research backs it up on all sides. And this is where the brain imbalances is one part of this, but also within the area where the stroke happened, you get disorganization. You have to understand that the brain, we often think the brain, this part does this, and this part does this, that it is separate compartments. That is how we have compartmentalized our thinking about diseases. You have specialists for this and you have specialists for that. Your brain is one big, whole, complete living organism, and every part communicates directly or indirectly with other parts. That is a very important concept to remember. So when one part becomes dysfunction, so gets dysfunctional, doesn't function as well anymore, it doesn't fit in the whole as much. So we lose connections within the hemisphere and to the opposite cerebellum and brainstem, and also on the same side to the brainstem. That's for another episode. There's a lot going on there on the same side, but also between the two hemispheres. That's the imbalance that I was talking about. Now, the networks, the networks existing within the brain, especially within the same hemisphere and between the two hemispheres, they are there so your interaction with the outside world is appropriate. You can place your attention and your concentration of things. You can execute motoric functions that are appropriate. You are aware of danger. You are aware of yourself. You can regulate your emotions. That's what these networks are. After a stroke, we often see that other networks, other than, for example, when you lose function in an arm or a leg or speech, become affected because they are indirectly, because there are connections from the primary motor areas and the secondary motor areas to other parts of your brain, because there's a constant communication. We see over time there are some diascasis. That's a very difficult term, but it means that remote areas lose some function because of the primary area losing its function. And what I'm trying to point out in this episode is there's not just imbalances between the two sides of the brain. We also have imbalances within our own hemisphere, within the networks existing in the brain. And that takes a lot of energy because you start to do things in an indirect way, not just do the good parts take over, but also in the existing connections we see that it becomes more difficult to execute function, and you have to put a lot of effort into steps often to compensate for this. So it takes your energy away, everything becomes less efficient. We also know if we address these networks that are dysfunctional or the imbalances, for example with direct stimulation, that can be electromagnetic, that can be with direct current, can be with laser, we have effects on this function. We can restore part of it, but that's usually only for a short time. There are also a lot of things you can do yourself, and that's for next episodes, to remediate or to enhance this function. Because if we decrease imbalances and we enhance function in this lost connectivity within the areas of the brain that are affected, we have to put a lot less effort into our rehabilitation effort, and everything is easier. It becomes more likely that you regain function because it's not suppressed, but you have to be aware that this is going on. And this episode was there to make you aware there are imbalances in brain function between the two hemispheres in remote areas and within the part of the brain where your stroke was. How can you find out what is going on? In future episodes we're going to talk about specific issues like we experienced with the client that I talked about. But what you can do now, we have provided a link in the comment section below where you can go. You can fill in a questionnaire and you can get a rough idea if this process is going on, if there's brain imbalances or if there is like a disconnection within the areas of the brain where your stroke was. So if you want to find out if superficially if this is going on with you, then fill in this form and you will get an answer back on this, so you get an idea. Then in next episodes, not necessarily the next episode, but in future episodes we're going to talk very specifically about the different, for example, if there's a problem with your executive functions, with your planning, organization, concentration, attention, or whether there is like problems with oversensitivity to light, sound, or you have difficulties with your eyes, then we're going to talk about that specifically. For now, be aware there's brain imbalances, there are cognitive issues because networks are disturbed, and you can find out what is going on by filling in the questionnaire that we provided below. I hope to see you in the next episode. It was a pleasure talking to you today.